The part of you you never see. There is a part of your mind that you have spent your entire life avoiding. Not consciously, not intentionally, but consistently. It is not something you were taught to see, and it is not something people around you openly talk about. Yet it is always there, quietly influencing the way you think, feel, and behave. Carl Jung called this hidden part of the mind the shadow. And the disturbing part is not that it exists. The disturbing part is that most people have no idea how much control it has over their lives. You might believe that your thoughts are your own, that your reactions are logical, and that your decisions are based on who you truly are. But Jung suggested something very different. He believed that a significant part of what drives you comes from aspects of yourself that you refuse to acknowledge. These are not just negative traits. They can be emotions, desires, impulses, and even potential abilities that you have pushed away because they did not fit the version of yourself you wanted to accept. Over time, these rejected parts do not disappear. They accumulate. And when something is ignored for long enough, it does not lose power. It gains it. The shadow grows in silence. It forms patterns. It begins to influence your behavior without asking for permission. You may notice it in moments where your reaction feels stronger than it should be, or when you act in ways that do not fully align with how you see yourself. But instead of recognizing it, most people do something else. They project it. They see in others what they cannot accept in themselves. They judge, criticize, and reject traits in other people that are actually reflections of their own hidden mind. And this is where the theory becomes uncomfortable, because it suggests that the parts of people you dislike the most might reveal something about you that you have been trying to hide. Why your mind hides the truth. The question is not whether the shadow exists. The real question is why it exists at all. Why would the mind hide parts of itself, and why would it do it so effectively that most people go through life without ever noticing it? From my perspective, the answer is rooted in survival. From a very early age, you begin to learn what is acceptable and what is not. You are rewarded for certain behaviors and discouraged from others. You are praised when you act in ways that fit expectations and corrected when you step outside of them. Over time, this shapes your identity, but it also creates a division. You start to build a version of yourself that is acceptable to the world, while slowly pushing away the parts that are not. These rejected parts do not disappear. They are simply moved out of awareness, and this process is not necessarily harmful in the beginning. It helps you function in society. It allows you to adapt, to belong, to connect with others. But there is a cost, because what you reject does not vanish. It stays with you, just outside your conscious awareness, waiting for moments where it can express itself. And when it does, it often appears in ways that feel unfamiliar or even uncomfortable. You may feel sudden anger without fully understanding why. You may experience jealousy, fear, or insecurity that seems disproportionate to the situation. These are not random reactions. They are signals. They are expressions of parts of yourself that you have not fully acknowledged, and the more you ignore them, the stronger they become. This is what makes Jung's idea so unsettling. It suggests that your mind is not as unified as you think, that there is a version of you operating in the background, influencing your behavior without your full awareness. And until you are willing to face it, you will continue to be affected by it in ways you do not fully understand. How the shadow controls you. The most unsettling part of Jung's theory is not the existence of the shadow itself, but how it operates without your awareness. It does not need your permission. It does not announce its presence. And yet, it shapes your behavior in ways you rarely question. From my perspective, the shadow becomes most visible in moments of intensity. When your reactions feel stronger than expected, when emotions seem disproportionate, or when you act in ways that surprise even you, that is often where the shadow is expressing itself. Think about moments when you judge someone harshly. The reaction might have felt justified, but if you look closely, there is often something deeper behind it. Sometimes what you criticize in others reflects something unresolved within yourself. This is what Jung described as projection. Instead of recognizing certain traits in yourself, your mind redirects them outward. It becomes easier to identify flaws in others than to confront them internally. And this creates a cycle. The more you reject these traits, the more your mind finds ways to encounter them externally. But projection is not the only way the shadow operates. It also appears in self-sabotage. You might delay important decisions, avoid opportunities, or repeat patterns that do not benefit you. On the surface, it may seem like a lack of discipline or clarity, but often it is something deeper, a part of you that resists change, that holds on to fear, or that is protecting an identity you are not ready to question. The shadow can also influence the way you see yourself. You may define yourself based only on what you accept, ignoring everything else. This creates a limited identity, one that feels stable but incomplete, and over time, this imbalance creates tension. Because the parts you ignore do not disappear, they wait. And the longer they are ignored, the more they shape your actions from the background, influencing who you become without you realizing it. Why facing it feels uncomfortable? If the shadow has such a strong influence, the natural question becomes, why don't people face it? Why is something so important so consistently ignored? From my perspective, the answer lies in discomfort. Facing the shadow requires you to look at parts of yourself that do not align with the image you have created. It challenges the idea that you fully understand who you are. And for most people, that is not easy to accept. You have spent years building an identity. You see yourself in a certain way. You believe you are consistent, rational, and in control. But the shadow introduces something different. It reveals contradictions. It shows that you are not as simple as you thought. And that creates resistance. Because accepting the shadow does not mean just observing it. It means acknowledging that those traits are part of you, not separate, not external, but internal. This can feel threatening. You may discover impulses, thoughts, or tendencies that you would rather deny. You may realize that you are capable of things you do not want to associate with yourself, and the instinctive reaction is to avoid it, to rationalize, to dismiss, or to shift focus elsewhere. But avoidance does not remove the shadow. It strengthens it. The more you refuse to look at something, the more power it has over you. Because what is unconscious cannot be controlled. It operates freely, influencing your behavior without your awareness. This is why the process of becoming aware of the shadow is often uncomfortable. It disrupts your sense of certainty. It forces you to question your own identity. It reveals that you are more complex than you would like to believe. But discomfort is not necessarily a negative sign. In many cases, it is an indication that you are getting closer to something real. And the ability to stay with that discomfort, instead of avoiding it, is what allows you to understand yourself on a deeper level. The consequence of ignoring it. Ignoring the shadow does not make it disappear. In fact, it does the opposite. It allows it to grow stronger, more defined, and more influential over time. This is where the real consequences begin to appear. From my perspective, the longer the shadow remains unacknowledged, the more it starts to shape your life in subtle but significant ways. It influences your decisions, your relationships, and even your perception of reality. You may find yourself repeating the same patterns without understanding why. You may enter similar situations, experience the same frustrations, and feel like you are moving in circles. On the surface, it may seem like external circumstances are responsible, but often there is something internal driving those patterns, something you have not fully faced. The shadow can also distort how you see others. When you project unresolved parts of yourself, your perception becomes filtered. You may interpret actions more negatively, assume intentions that are not there, or react in ways that escalate situations unnecessarily. This creates distance, not just from others, but from reality itself. Because you are no longer responding to what is actually happening. You are responding to a version of reality shaped by what you have not acknowledged within yourself. Over time, this can lead to a sense of confusion. You may feel like things are not aligning, like something is off, but you cannot clearly identify what it is. And the more you try to fix it externally, the less progress you make, because the source is internal. The most significant consequence is the loss of self-understanding. You believe you know yourself, but your actions tell a different story. There is a gap between who you think you are and how you actually behave. And that gap is where the shadow exists, unseen but constantly active. What happens when you finally see it? At some point, If you are willing to look closely enough, you begin to notice the patterns, the reactions that repeat, the emotions that feel familiar, and the behaviors that do not fully align with how you see yourself. This is often the first moment where the shadow becomes visible, not all at once and not in a dramatic way, but gradually. You start to recognize that certain thoughts are not random, that certain reactions are not isolated. They are connected. From my perspective, this moment is both unsettling and necessary, because once you begin to see the shadow, you cannot go back to not seeing it. You become aware of the complexity within yourself. You start to understand that you are not just the parts you accept, but also the parts you have ignored. And this changes how you relate to yourself. Instead of rejecting those aspects, you begin to observe them, not with judgment, but with curiosity. You start asking different questions. Not, why is this happening to me, but what is this showing me about myself? This shift is important, because awareness creates space. It allows you to respond instead of react. It gives you the ability to pause, to recognize patterns before they fully take over, and to make more conscious choices. But this is not about eliminating the shadow. That is not possible. The shadow is part of being human. The goal is not to remove it, but to understand it, to integrate it in a way that reduces its unconscious influence over your actions. And this is where Jung's theory becomes less disturbing and more useful, because it suggests that self-awareness is not about becoming perfect, it is about becoming whole, understanding both the parts you accept and the parts you have avoided. And when you reach that point, something changes. You are no longer controlled by what you refuse to see. You begin to understand it. And that understanding gives you a different kind of control, one that is not based on avoidance but on awareness.